Welcome back! I recently bought a nice car for my wife. We already have a car and we don't need two, but this is basically the same car I already have and love, except this one is an automatic, which the missus favors greatly. In fact, it was the cheapest automatic in my area, had 17 months on its mandatory inspection and enough vapor in the fuel lines to get it to the next petrol station with just a few coughs. Now life threw me a turd. No, not the car. Although the car as well. But also I need to get this car fit for a long distance trip in just 3 days. Have to because, well, family. And at least in the car we will be safe from other people exhaling on us. So this car I bought, it's got wheels which won't come off, rotten tires on them, a disintegrated control arm bushing in the front right, a brake fluid reservoir in need of exchanging, and it needs a brake fluid service. So please, join me in my adventure of getting this thing back on the road. So most YouTubers will tell you the first step is to jack up your car. But they are wrong in this instance. The first step is to loosen the wheel bolts, unless you are sure you can get them off with a rattle gun, which I am sure I cannot. I managed to get 14 of the 16 wheel bolts loose, and it took me about 4 hours, approximately 2 years worth of well to live, and one of my 17mm socket wrenches cracking. Tja. Long story short, the remaining 2 bolts need to be drilled out. I used a center drill to get the hole started, and I intended to first drill the bolt out with a 7mm drill, then increase drill sizes until the head comes off. Problem was, I am too clumsy with a hand drill. So I broke the 7mm drill, tried bigger ones. The result was, well, not amazing to be honest. Finally, after a lot of one step forward, 2 drills down, I decided to become bold and put one of my industrial surplus end mills in the drill chuck. Had some reservations about this as they are expensive used, and I was not sure how it would cope with my unsteady hand. But it turned out to work pretty nicely, and I managed to get the hole right down to the end of the bolt's head. Still took long enough. Then I inserted a 12mm linear guide rod and broke the head clean off. The trial and error took quite some time, so when I did the second bolt, the camera's battery died early on. The second bolt took maybe 20 minutes. Then I finally jacked up the car and started taking the wheels off. The part of the bolt remaining in the wheel hub was easy enough to turn out by hand once it was no longer under tension. Next, I have to exchange the damaged brake fluid reservoir, which has a cracked low-level switch. Afterwards, I'll bleed the brakes. I don't know how long it's been since somebody's done this, and it has to be done once a year. Why? Because brake fluid takes up water over time, which can boil when heated and form vapor bubbles in the brake lines or calipers. First, I have to remove all the fluid from the reservoir so it won't spill the stuff all over my engine compartment. I am using a syringe to remove the brake fluid from the reservoir, as pumping it out requires a friend and carries the risk of pumping air into the system. To get to the fluid with my syringe, I had to break out a plastic filter in my old reservoir to be able to stick it in far enough. Here's a hint. If you're removing the brake fluid reservoir, it helps to ensure that no air can enter the system. To lock the system against air intrusion, press down the brake pedal while someone else opens the bleed nipple on a caliper. Push the pedal all the way down, close the bleed nipple, and then secure the brake pedal in place using, in my case, an extendable curtain rod. Do disconnect your battery, since at least in all of my cars the brake lights work even with the ignition off. I knew this in principle, but in all the excitement I forgot about it and then had to jump start it the next morning. Once the fluid is extracted from the reservoir and the master cylinder closed up with the curtain rod, the fluid level sensor cable is removed and the reservoir simply pulled out the 2 rubber grommets it is sitting in. Make sure you clean the reservoir and master cylinder thoroughly beforehand, focusing especially on the grommets. Getting any dirt into your master cylinder can be deadly. Also make sure to put some rags around the reservoir and under the master cylinder to catch any spillage because, well, brake fluid is highly corrosive and also works as a paint stripper on the side. You know, got bills to pay. The new reservoir pops in the same way the old one came out. Make sure the switch's plug on the new reservoir matches your old one, otherwise soldering or buying a new one may be required. While dreamily looking at my new reservoir, both of us just taking our time and getting comfortable, I noticed there is a stubby pipe appendix kind of thing, which presumably is there to easily drain the reservoir when it's due to be exchanged. Didn't take note of it before, but it's alright. The syringe option is safer in terms of spillage in my opinion. The most cost-effective tool you can get for doing a brake fluid service is called a friend. You can often lure them into your driveway to help by dangling a beer in front of them. I tried a potato on a string, but they just give you puzzled looks. Trust me. Since here I go again on my own, I am using this Easy Bleed device, which works off the pressure of a car tire, because until recently I had to fix my cars without access to any friends, power tools or compressed air, and it was the cheapest solution back then. With this, you can single-handedly change the brake fluid. Perfect if, like most internet people, you don't have any friends. Or, like in my case, live so far away from them that calling them over for a brake service after not communicating for half a year seems a bit awkward. I am starting my second day of the project off topic with cleaning the hubs because that was necessary and I had to do it while there was still some daylight so the neighbors won't complain. The manual of your car will tell you which order the brakes have to be bled in. Usually you start with the one furthest from the master cylinder, in my case the rear right, then rear left, front right and lastly front left, which is where the driver sits. I will show you the procedure how it was done on the front right. It is exactly the same on all 4 wheels. Before you bleed rusty old brakes, you might want to first clean the area around the nipple with a wire brush. Scrub those nipples good, then rinse with your brake cleaner of choice. Also, it has happened to me that they are so stuck in place that an attempt to open them up with a cheap brake line wrench caused them to get rounded off. The best way to avoid that is to first loosen it up with a fitting socket wrench, since they grab the nipple from all 6 sides and make rounding off less likely. Just be careful to wash your sockets and calipers after if you accidentally spilled some fluid on them, so they don't corrode. Then you can use even a cheap brake line wrench to bleed your brakes. After hanging the bottle on the next caliper, I mark the approximate fluid level in that position to keep track of how much fluid I have let out. Also make sure you keep track of the fluid level in your filling tool. If it runs dry, it will push air into the system, and you should avoid this at all costs. If it happens, you have to make sure the air is pushed out of all lines, including the ABS blocks, etc. Best to avoid that, it's not fun. Once the color of the fluid coming out of the bleed nipples matches the color of the new fluid going in, you can move on to the next caliper. When I cannot spot a color difference in the fluids from the beginning, I just flush with 200 to 250 milliliters of fluid per wheel to be on the safe side, since the bottles are usually a liter and they do not keep until next year once open. If you have a manual transmission, there is a good chance your clutch is actuated by hydraulics, which use the same brake fluid reservoir as the brakes. Make sure to bleed that subsystem too, even if it may be hard to reach. Store your old brake fluid in old brake fluid bottles and dispose of them in an environmentally friendly and legal way. When all brakes are bled, check once more to make sure no brake fluid is running around outside the system, for example at the brake calipers. If you have touched your brake discs, make sure to clean them using brake cleaner. Now the brake hydraulics are good for another year of reliable operation. Oh, and do put the little rubber caps back on the bleed nipples where you found them. If they fall away and you can't find them anymore, visit your local parts dealer. He will hook you up without asking too many questions. Trust me, I've been there.